I'm Jasmine. The day NASA's director saluted me and called me General ready for launch, my entire family's world turned upside down. For 3 years, they had mocked me, calling me worthless, telling everyone I was just a janitor who couldn't amount to anything. What they didn't know was that I was hiding the biggest secret of my life. A secret so classified that revealing it could have ended my career forever. But when a catastrophic failure threatened the most important space mission in human history, I had no choice but to step out of the shadows. Have you ever been so underestimated that people forgot you were even in the room? Stick around, because what happened next will leave you speechless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune as I pushed my cleaning cart down the sterile hallway of Henderson Tech Solutions. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the building was as empty as my family's faith in me. The wheels of my cart squeaked with each step, a sound that had become the soundtrack to my new life. 3 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be mopping floors and emptying trash cans for a living, I would have laughed until my sides hurt. Now the joke was on me, and my family never let me forget it. I paused outside the executive conference room, looking through the glass walls at the massive monitors displaying satellite imagery and technical specifications that most people couldn't begin to understand. But I wasn't most people, though nobody here knew that. To them, I was just Jasmine Rodriguez, the quiet night janitor who kept to herself and did her job without complaint. They had no idea that those technical diagrams made perfect sense to me, or that I could probably improve half the designs they were working on. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Sarah. "Mom's asking when you're going to get a real job again. The family dinner is this Sunday. Try not to embarrass us by talking about your career in janitorial services." I stared at the message, feeling the familiar sting of disappointment that had become my constant companion. Sarah worked as a marketing executive downtown, and she never missed an opportunity to remind me how far I had fallen from grace. 3 years ago, I had been Dr. Jasmine Rodriguez, aerospace engineer with top-secret clearance, decorated Air Force officer, and one of the youngest people ever to hold the rank of colonel in the Space Operations Division. I had designed guidance systems for missions that the public would never know existed, worked alongside astronauts preparing for classified operations, and held briefings with generals whose names appeared in history books. My family had been proud then, boasting to neighbors about their daughter, the war hero, the brilliant scientist, the rising star in America's space program. Then everything changed in one catastrophic night that I still couldn't talk about, even now. The official story was that I had suffered a breakdown, that the pressure of my high-security position had become too much for me to handle. The truth was far more complicated, but it was buried under so many layers of classification that it might as well have been fiction. I had been given a choice: disappear into civilian life with my reputation intact, or face a court-martial that would destroy not just my career, but potentially compromise national security. The choice had been easy, even if living with the consequences wasn't. My family didn't understand why I had suddenly left my prestigious position to become, in their words, just a janitor. They assumed I had cracked under pressure, that I wasn't strong enough to handle a real career. My mother, Patricia, had stopped bragging about me to her church friends. My brother David had started making jokes about me needing to find myself whenever we gathered for holidays. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Even my cousins, who used to ask me about space missions and fighter jets, now changed the subject whenever my job came up. The worst part wasn't their disappointment, though that cut deep enough. The worst part was the pity. The way they looked at me like I was broken, like I needed their help to get my life back on track. Sarah had even offered to help me write a resume to apply for normal jobs, as if my doctorate in aerospace engineering and my military service record had somehow evaporated the moment I put on a janitor's uniform. But I had my reasons for choosing this path, reasons that went far beyond what anyone could see on the surface. Henderson Tech Solutions wasn't just any technology company. They held contracts with NASA, developing communication systems and satellite technology for upcoming missions. Working here, even as a janitor, allowed me to keep my finger on the pulse of the aerospace industry without drawing attention to myself. I could observe, listen, and stay connected to the world I had been forced to leave behind. More importantly, this job gave me something I had lost in my previous life: peace. The simple routine of cleaning, the quiet hours when I could think without interruption, the absence of life or death decisions that kept me awake for days at a time. For 3 years I had convinced myself that this was enough, that I could live with being underestimated if it meant I could sleep through the night without nightmares about failed missions and classified disasters. My supervisor, Gary, was a decent man in his 50s who treated me with respect, even if he didn't understand why someone with my education was pushing a mop for minimum wage. I had been honest with him about my background during the interview, though I had left out the classified details that explained my career change. He had hired me anyway, probably out of curiosity more than anything else. Sometimes I caught him watching me with a puzzled expression, like he was trying to solve a riddle he couldn't quite figure out. Tonight felt different, though I couldn't put my finger on why. As I cleaned the conference room, I noticed unusual activity on the monitors. Technical specifications for what looked like a Mars rover mission were displayed across multiple screens, along with trajectory calculations that appeared far more complex than typical satellite deployments. I found myself stopping to study the equations, my mind automatically running through the mathematical formulas I hadn't used professionally in 3 years. The calculations were wrong. Not obviously wrong, but subtly incorrect in a way that would cause catastrophic failure during the mission's most critical phase. I stared at the screen, my cleaning supplies forgotten, as I mentally worked through the problem. The error was in the gravitational compensation algorithms, a mistake that would send the rover off course by thousands of miles once it reached Mars' atmosphere. Whoever had designed this system had made the same error I had seen countless times from engineers who underestimated the complexity of interplanetary navigation. I shook my head and forced myself to return to cleaning. It wasn't my problem anymore. I wasn't Dr. Rodriguez, aerospace engineer. I was just Jasmine, the night janitor, and it wasn't my place to correct the work of Henderson Tech's highly paid engineers. But the error nagged at me as I finished cleaning the conference room and moved on to the next floor. My phone rang as I was emptying trash cans in the accounting department. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in 3 years, but I recognized it immediately. It was Tom Mitchell, my former colleague from Edwards Air Force Base, and one of the few people who knew the real reason behind my career change. My hands trembled slightly as I answered. "Tom, why are you calling me at midnight?" I whispered, glancing around to make sure I was alone. "Jasmine, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. We have a situation, and I need to know if you're still bound by your non-disclosure agreements." The tone of his voice sent a chill down my spine. Tom had been my partner on 3 classified missions, and I had never heard him sound this worried. "Of course I'm still bound. What's happening?" "The Artemis 7 mission launches in 48 hours. It's not just a Mars rover, Jasmine. There are 6 astronauts on board, and the guidance system is showing anomalies that our current team can't identify. NASA's best engineers have been working around the clock for 2 weeks, but they can't find the source of the problem." I closed my eyes, already knowing where this conversation was heading. "Tom, I can't. You know I can't get involved in anything classified anymore. The mission is public, Jasmine. It's all over the news. But the technical specifications that might save those astronauts' lives are exactly the kind of work you specialized in. Dr. Martinez remembers your work on the Europa mission. She specifically asked if there was any way to contact you." Dr. Rebecca Martinez had been my mentor during my early years at NASA, before my military assignment had pulled me into classified operations. She was brilliant, demanding, and one of the few people in the aerospace industry who had truly understood the theoretical work I had been developing before everything went wrong. Even if I wanted to help, which I'm not saying I do, what makes you think they'd listen to a janitor? My security clearance was revoked, remember? I don't even officially exist in NASA's database anymore. Tom was quiet for a moment. "Because 6 people are going to die if someone doesn't figure this out, and you're the only person I know who has the specific expertise needed to solve this problem. The guidance system is exhibiting the same anomalies we saw on the classified mission 3 years ago, the one that—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew exactly which mission he was referring to, and the memory of that failure still woke me up in cold sweats. 3 years ago, I had designed a guidance system for a classified satellite deployment that had failed spectacularly, resulting in the loss of $1 billion payload and nearly causing an international incident. The failure had been traced back to an error in my calculations, an error that had led to my resignation from the military and my exile from the aerospace industry. What nobody knew, what was still classified at the highest levels, was that my calculations had been correct. The failure had been caused by sabotage, by someone who had altered my work before the mission launched. But proving that would have required revealing details about the mission that could have compromised national security, so I had taken the blame and disappeared into civilian life. Jasmine, are you still there? I'm here. But Tom, even if the situation is as serious as you're saying, I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. I haven't worked on guidance systems since. Since everything happened, my skills might not be sharp enough anymore. Your skills don't just disappear, Jasmine. And from what I can see of the technical specifications, this problem is right in your wheelhouse. The anomalies are appearing in the gravitational compensation algorithms, specifically in the calculations for Mars atmospheric entry. My blood ran cold. Those were exactly the calculations I had been staring at on the monitors in the conference room just an hour earlier. The same calculations that had contained the error I had automatically identified and mentally corrected. It couldn't be a coincidence. Tom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is Henderson Tech Solutions involved in this mission? How did you... Yes, they're one of the primary contractors for the communication systems. Why? I looked around the empty office building, seeing it with completely new eyes. I wasn't just a janitor working for a random technology company. I was working for one of the contractors on the mission that was about to fail, in a building full of the very technical specifications that Tom was describing. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. Tom, I think I might have already seen the problem you're talking about, but if I'm right, then we have a much bigger issue than just incorrect calculations. What do you mean? I thought about the error I had spotted in the conference room, the subtle but catastrophic mistake that would doom the mission. If Tom was right about the timeline, then Henderson Tech would be delivering their final specifications to NASA within the next few hours. Once those calculations were integrated into the mission's guidance system, it would be too late to fix them without delaying the launch. I mean that if someone doesn't catch this error in the next few hours, 6 astronauts are going to die, and everyone is going to assume it was another Jasmine Rodriguez design failure. The irony was bitter and perfect. 3 years ago, I had been blamed for a mission failure that wasn't my fault. Now I was in a position to prevent a real failure, but doing so would require me to risk everything I had built in my quiet, anonymous life. If I stepped forward to help, I would have to reveal my identity, my background, and my expertise. My family would finally understand who I really was, but they would also learn about the failure that had ended my career. Jasmine, I know this is a lot to ask, but these astronauts have families, dreams, people who love them. They trust that the technology will bring them home safely. And right now, you might be the only person who can ensure that happens. I closed my eyes and thought about my sister's text message, about my family's disappointment, about 3 years of being treated like a failure. Then I thought about 6 people floating in space, trusting their lives to calculations that I knew were wrong. Tom, if I do this, if I get involved, there's no going back. My cover will be blown, and everyone will know that I've been hiding my real identity for 3 years. Sometimes doing the right thing costs us everything we've built, but sometimes it also gives us back everything we thought we'd lost. I looked at my reflection in the dark window of the office building, seeing both the janitor I had become and the engineer I had been. For 3 years, I had convinced myself that being underestimated was a small price to pay for peace and anonymity. But standing there in the empty hallway, holding a phone call that could change everything, I realized that some things were more important than my carefully constructed, quiet life. All right, Tom. Tell Dr. Martinez that Dr. Jasmine Rodriguez is ready to come out of retirement. But she's going to have to come to me, because I'm not leaving this building until we fix this problem. As I hung up the phone, I knew that my life as just a janitor was about to end. Tomorrow, my family would learn the truth about who I really was, and why I had chosen to hide in plain sight for 3 years. They would understand that their disappointment had been based on a lie, and that the woman they had pitied was actually trying to save lives from the shadows. But tonight, I had work to do. Real work, the kind that mattered, the kind that could mean the difference between 6 families celebrating a successful mission and 6 families mourning an avoidable tragedy. I pulled out my access card and headed back to the conference room, my mind already racing through the calculations that would prove I was still Dr. Jasmine Rodriguez, aerospace engineer, even if I had been hiding behind a janitor's uniform. The hardest part wouldn't be solving the technical problem. The hardest part would be facing my family's reaction when they realized that for 3 years, they had been wrong about everything. But as I settled down at the conference room table and began working through the equations that could save 6 lives, I realized that their opinion of me mattered far less than I had thought. What mattered was doing the work I was born to do, even if it meant sacrificing the quiet life I had built from the ashes of my former career. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I worked, but for the first time in 3 years, the sound didn't feel lonely. It felt like the beginning of something new, something that would change everything, for everyone who had ever underestimated the quiet woman pushing a cleaning cart through their lives. The security cameras in Henderson Tech Solutions recorded everything, but nobody paid attention to janitors working late shifts. I had learned this over 3 years of invisible existence, moving through the building like a ghost while executives and engineers went about their important work. Tonight, that invisibility was my greatest asset, as I accessed systems and databases that should have been far beyond a cleaning woman's clearance level. My fingers moved across the keyboard with muscle memory I thought I had forgotten. The login credentials I was using belonged to Gary, my supervisor, who had made the mistake of writing his password on a sticky note attached to his monitor. I felt a twinge of guilt about violating his trust, but 6 lives hung in the balance, and guilt was a luxury I couldn't afford. The Henderson Tech servers contained terabytes of data related to the Artemis 7 mission. Navigation protocols, communication arrays, backup systems, redundancy checks, and most importantly, the gravitational compensation algorithms that I knew contained fatal errors. As I dove deeper into the technical specifications, the scope of the problem became clear. This wasn't just a simple miscalculation. Someone had systematically introduced errors into multiple systems, errors that would compound during the most critical phases of the mission. My phone vibrated with another call from Tom. I answered while continuing to scroll through code, my eyes scanning thousands of lines of programming that most people would find incomprehensible. Jasmine, Dr. Martinez is on her way to your location. She should arrive within the hour. How bad is it? I paused, staring at a particularly egregious error in the atmospheric entry calculations. Tom, this isn't incompetence. These errors are too precise, too specifically targeted to be accidental. Someone has deliberately sabotaged this mission. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Tom spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Are you absolutely certain about that? The probability calculations for successful atmospheric entry have been altered to show a 97% success rate when the actual probability, based on these algorithms, is closer to 30%. The trajectory adjustments for Mars orbital insertion contain errors that will send the spacecraft into a decaying orbit. And the emergency backup protocols have been modified to trigger system shutdowns instead of automatic corrections. I stood up from the computer and began pacing the conference room, my mind racing through the implications. Tom, whoever did this has intimate knowledge of aerospace engineering and access to classified technical specifications. This isn't some random hacker or disgruntled employee. This is someone with serious credentials who wanted this mission to fail. Do you have any idea who might be responsible? I thought about the Henderson Tech employees I had observed over the past 3 years. The engineers who worked late into the night, the project managers who stressed about deadlines, the executives who worried about contract renewals. None of them had seemed like the type to commit sabotage, but then again, I had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. I need to access the revision history for these files. If I can track when the changes were made and from which terminals, we might be able to identify the saboteur. Jasmine, be careful. If someone is willing to kill 6 astronauts to make a point, they won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way. The warning sent a chill down my spine, but I pushed the fear aside. I had spent 3 years hiding from confrontation, avoiding anything that might draw attention to my past or my capabilities. But tonight was different. Tonight I was Dr. Jasmine Rodriguez again, and Dr. Rodriguez didn't back down from challenges, no matter how dangerous they might be. I hung up with Tom and returned to the computer, diving deeper into the Henderson Tech systems than any janitor should have been able to go. The revision history told a disturbing story. The sabotage had been carried out over a period of months, with small changes made to different systems by someone who understood exactly how to avoid detection. The modifications had been made during off hours, using legitimate employee credentials, and each change had been documented with plausible technical justifications. But the saboteur had made one crucial mistake. They had used the same terminal for all of the modifications, a workstation in the Advanced Systems Division that belonged to Dr. Marcus Webb, Henderson Tech's lead aerospace engineer. I knew Marcus by sight, a brilliant but arrogant man in his 40s who had never acknowledged my existence during my 3 years as a janitor. He was exactly the type of person who would assume that cleaning staff were invisible and unimportant. I accessed the security logs for Dr. Webb's office and found something interesting. On every night when sabotage had occurred, the security system showed Dr. Webb's keycard being used to access the building between midnight and 3 a.m. But the parking garage records showed his vehicle leaving the building at normal business hours on those same days. Either Dr. Webb was entering the building through an alternate route, or someone else had been using his credentials. My phone rang again, this time showing an unknown number with a Virginia area code. I hesitated before answering, wondering if my investigation had already attracted unwanted attention. Dr. Rodriguez? The voice was female, crisp and professional, with an authority that commanded immediate respect. This is Jasmine. Who am I speaking with? Dr. Rebecca Martinez, Director of Mission Operations at NASA. Tom Mitchell briefed me on your situation and your concerns about the Artemis 7 mission. I'm currently en route to your location, but I need to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. Hearing Dr. Martinez's voice brought back a flood of memories from my early days at NASA. She had been my mentor during my graduate work, the person who had first recognized my potential for advanced aerospace engineering. She had also been the one to recommend me for the classified military assignment that had ultimately ended my career. Dr. Martinez, the situation is worse than Tom indicated. The technical specifications for Artemis 7 have been systematically sabotaged. Someone with high-level access has introduced multiple points of failure that will cause catastrophic mission failure during the most critical phases. How certain are you of this assessment? I looked at the screens full of corrupted code and deliberate errors. Completely certain. I've identified at least 17 separate modifications that serve no technical purpose other than to ensure mission failure. The sabotage is sophisticated and appears to have been carried out over several months by someone with intimate knowledge of the mission parameters. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment. Jasmine, I need to ask you a direct question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you absolutely certain that your analysis is correct? 3 years ago, a mission failed because of calculations that were attributed to your work. I need to know that you're not seeing patterns that aren't really there. The question hit me like a physical blow. Even Dr. Martinez, my former mentor, still believed that I had been responsible for the classified mission failure 3 years ago. The official story had been so convincing that even people who knew me well had accepted that I had made a catastrophic error in judgment. Dr. Martinez, I understand your concern, but I need you to trust me on this. The errors I'm seeing are not subtle miscalculations or judgment calls. They are deliberate modifications designed to cause specific failures at specific moments. Someone wants this mission to fail, and they want it to fail in a way that will maximize casualties and public attention. All right, I'm 20 minutes out from your location. Don't make any changes to the systems, and don't contact anyone else about what you've discovered. If someone is sabotaging NASA missions, we need to handle this through proper channels. After she hung up, I returned to my investigation with renewed urgency. If Dr. Martinez was going to believe my assessment and take action to save the mission, I needed to have ironclad evidence of the sabotage. I began systematically documenting every error, every unauthorized modification, and every piece of evidence that pointed to deliberate sabotage. As I worked, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The sabotage wasn't limited to the Henderson Tech systems. Cross-referencing the error patterns with publicly available NASA documentation, I could see that similar modifications had been made to systems at other contractors working on the Artemis 7 mission. This wasn't the work of a single disgruntled employee. This was a coordinated effort involving multiple people with access to classified information across several organizations. My hands trembled as I printed out page after page of evidence. Someone had orchestrated a conspiracy to destroy the Artemis 7 mission, and they had been planning it for months. The scope of the operation suggested resources and coordination that went far beyond anything a single individual could accomplish. This was the work of an organization, possibly even a foreign government, that wanted to deal a devastating blow to America's space program. I thought about the 6 astronauts preparing for launch in less than 48 hours. Commander Lisa Chen, a decorated Navy pilot making her 3rd space mission. Dr. Michael Foster, a brilliant geologist whose research on Martian soil composition had revolutionized our understanding of the planet. Captain Sarah Williams, an Air Force engineer whose innovations in spacecraft design had earned her international recognition. Lieutenant Colonel James Thompson, a Marine who had volunteered for the mission despite having 3 young children at home. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a Mexican-American physicist whose work on propulsion systems had made the Mars mission possible. And Dr. David Kim, a Korean-American astronaut whose expertise in life support systems had earned him a place on the crew. They were heroes. All of them, people who had dedicated their lives to pushing the boundaries of human knowledge and exploration. They trusted that the technology would bring them home safely, that the thousands of engineers and technicians working on their mission had done everything possible to ensure their survival. They had no idea that someone was actively working to ensure their deaths. The elevator chimed, indicating that someone had arrived on our floor. I quickly saved my work and closed the sensitive files, returning the computer screens to their normal display of routine technical specifications. Through the conference room windows, I could see 2 figures approaching, Dr. Martinez, recognizable even after 3 years, and a younger man in a dark suit who moved with the careful awareness of security personnel. Dr. Martinez looked exactly as I remembered her, though her dark hair now showed streaks of silver, and her face bore the weight of additional responsibility. She was in her early 60s, small in stature but commanding in presence, with the kind of intensity that made people stop talking when she entered a room. The man with her was clearly some kind of federal agent, probably FBI or NSA, given the sensitive nature of the situation. They paused outside the conference room, and I could see Dr. Martinez studying me through the glass. I knew she was trying to reconcile the woman she saw now with the brilliant young engineer she had mentored 15 years ago. I looked different than I had during my NASA days. 3 years of manual labor had changed my body, and 3 years of anonymity had changed my demeanor. I no longer carried myself with the confidence of someone who knew she was the smartest person in the room. I had learned to be invisible, to take up less space, to avoid drawing attention to myself. But as I stood up to meet them, I felt something shifting inside me. The familiar thrill of solving complex problems, the satisfaction of seeing patterns that others missed, the sense of purpose that came from using my skills to make a difference. For 3 years, I had convinced myself that I was content with my quiet life, but standing in that conference room with evidence of sabotage spread across the table, I realized how much I had missed being Dr. Jasmine Rodriguez. Dr. Martinez entered the room first, her eyes immediately going to the computer screens and printed documents. "Jasmine, it's good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances. This is Agent David Parker from the FBI. He's been briefed on the general situation, but not on the specific details." Agent Parker was younger than I had expected, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that suggested he was much more than just a typical federal agent. He studied me with obvious curiosity, probably wondering how a janitor had managed to uncover a conspiracy that had eluded NASA's best security experts. Dr. Rodriguez, Tom Mitchell provided us with your credentials and background, but I have to admit I'm having trouble understanding how you ended up working as a janitor for a NASA contractor. That seems like an unusual career choice for someone with your qualifications. I had been dreading this question for 3 years, knowing that eventually someone would ask for an explanation that I couldn't provide without revealing classified information. Agent Parker, my departure from the aerospace industry 3 years ago was related to a classified mission failure. The details are still restricted, but I was held responsible for technical errors that resulted in significant losses. My security clearance was revoked, and I was effectively blacklisted from the industry. Dr. Martinez's expressions softened with what looked like sympathy. Jasmine, I want you to know that I never believed the official story about what happened on that mission. I know your work and I know your standards. The errors that caused that failure were not consistent with your usual level of precision. Her words hit me harder than I had expected. For 3 years, I had carried the weight of that false accusation, believing that everyone who knew me had accepted the official story. Hearing Dr. Martinez express doubt about my guilt was like having a weight lifted from my shoulders. Thank you for saying that, Dr. Martinez. But right now, we have a more immediate problem to deal with. I gestured to the computer screens and printed evidence. The Artemis 7 mission has been systematically sabotaged by someone with high-level access to classified information. The errors are too sophisticated and too coordinated to be the work of a single individual. Agent Parker moved to the table and began examining the printed documents. What kind of errors are we talking about? Can you give me specific examples? I walked him through the most critical problems, explaining how the atmospheric entry calculations had been modified to ensure that the spacecraft would burn up during descent, how the orbital insertion protocols had been altered to send the crew into a decaying orbit around Mars, and how the emergency backup systems had been programmed to shut down instead of providing life-saving corrections. Each modification was made to look like a legitimate technical adjustment, I explained. Someone who didn't understand the underlying physics might not realize that these changes would cause catastrophic failure. But, taken together, they represent a coordinated effort to ensure that the mission fails and that the crew doesn't survive. Dr. Martinez studied the documentation with growing alarm. How long would it take to correct these errors? That depends on how many systems have been compromised. Based on what I've found here at Henderson Tech, I estimate that similar sabotage has occurred at least 3 other contractor sites. We would need to audit every piece of code, every calculation, and every system protocol. With a coordinated effort involving dozens of engineers working around the clock, we might be able to identify and correct the problems in 36 hours. And if we can't complete the corrections in time? I looked at both of them, knowing that my next words would change everything. Then 6 astronauts are going to die, and it's going to look like another catastrophic failure of American aerospace engineering. Whoever is behind this sabotage doesn't just want to kill the crew. They want to destroy public confidence in NASA and set back the space program by decades. Agent Parker was taking notes as I spoke, his expression growing more serious with each detail. Dr. Rodriguez, you mentioned that the sabotage appears to be coordinated across multiple contractor sites. Do you have any theories about who might be behind this kind of operation? I had been thinking about that question for the past hour, running through possibilities and trying to identify who would have both the motivation and the resources to orchestrate such a complex sabotage operation. The level of coordination and technical expertise suggests either a foreign intelligence agency or a well-funded domestic organization with serious grievances against NASA. The saboteur would need access to classified information, detailed knowledge of aerospace engineering, and the ability to compromise multiple secure systems without detection. Any specific suspects or organizations that come to mind? I hesitated, knowing that my next words would transform this from a technical problem into a full-scale federal investigation. 3 years ago, during my last classified assignment, I worked on a mission that was sabotaged in a very similar way. The official investigation concluded that I had made technical errors, but I always suspected that the mission had been deliberately compromised. If the same person or organization is responsible for both incidents, then we're dealing with someone who has been targeting American space missions for years. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her expression intense. "Jasmine, are you saying that you believe the mission failure 3 years ago was actually sabotage and that you were framed for it?" The moment of truth had arrived. For 3 years, I had carried the burden of false accusations, accepting blame for a failure that wasn't my fault, because proving my innocence would have required revealing classified information. But now, with 6 lives hanging in the balance and clear evidence of a continuing conspiracy, I couldn't remain silent any longer. "Yes, Dr. Martinez. I believe I was framed for a mission failure that was actually caused by sabotage. And I believe that whoever framed me is now trying to destroy the Artemis 7 mission using the same methods. The only difference is that this time, instead of just losing a satellite, we're going to lose 6 human lives." The room fell silent as both Dr. Martinez and Agent Parker absorbed the implications of what I had just revealed. I had spent 3 years hiding from the truth, accepting exile and humiliation rather than fighting to clear my name. But standing in that conference room, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that threatened the lives of 6 brave astronauts, I realized that some things were more important than protecting my own reputation or maintaining my comfortable anonymity. Agent Parker closed his notebook and looked directly at me. "Dr. Rodriguez, I need to ask you a very important question. Are you willing to put your career and your personal safety on the line to help us stop this sabotage and save the Artemis 7 mission?" I thought about my sister's mocking text messages, about my family's disappointment, about 3 years of being treated like a failure by people who had once been proud of my achievements. Then I thought about Commander Chen and her crew, trusting their lives to technology that had been deliberately compromised. "Agent Parker, my career was destroyed 3 years ago when I was framed for a crime I didn't commit. My personal safety has been compromised since the moment I discovered this sabotage. But 6 astronauts are counting on people like us to bring them home safely, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let them down because I was too afraid to step out of the shadows." Dr. Martinez smiled for the first time since entering the room. "That sounds like the Jasmine Rodriguez I used to know. Agent Parker, I think we have our lead engineer for the emergency response team." As the 3 of us began planning our response to the sabotage, I felt a familiar energy coursing through my veins. For 3 years, I had convinced myself that I was content being invisible, that hiding behind a janitor's uniform was an acceptable price to pay for peace and anonymity. But as I prepared to step back into the world of high-stakes aerospace engineering, I realized that some people weren't meant to be invisible. Some people were meant to solve impossible problems, to take on dangerous challenges, and to fight for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. The woman who had been hiding in Henderson Tech Solutions for 3 years was about to disappear forever. In her place would stand Dr. Jasmine Rodriguez, aerospace engineer, former Air Force colonel, and the only person who might be able to save 6 lives and stop a conspiracy that threatened America's future in space. The command center at NASA Johnson Space Center buzzed with an energy I hadn't felt in 3 years. Banks of monitors displayed real-time telemetry from the Artemis 7 spacecraft, while teams of engineers worked frantically to verify and correct the sabotaged systems. Dr. Martinez had moved mountains to get me temporary security clearance, and within 6 hours of our meeting at Henderson Tech, I found myself back in the world I thought I'd lost forever. But this homecoming came with a price. Every person in that room knew my history, knew about the mission failure that had ended my career. As I walked through the corridors, I could feel their eyes on me, could hear the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I passed. Some looked at me with curiosity, wondering how the disgraced engineer had managed to uncover a conspiracy that had eluded NASA's best minds. Others looked at me with suspicion, questioning whether someone who had failed so spectacularly 3 years ago could really be trusted with the lives of 6 astronauts. Agent Parker had assembled a joint task force that included FBI cybersecurity experts, NASA engineers, and military intelligence analysts. The conference room where we gathered was secured with multiple layers of electronic surveillance countermeasures, and everyone present had been cleared at the highest levels of government security. This wasn't just about saving a space mission anymore. This was about protecting national security and preventing what could be the most devastating attack on American space capabilities in history. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agent Parker began, standing at the head of the conference table. What we're dealing with is far more serious than initially suspected. Dr. Rodriguez's investigation has uncovered evidence of a coordinated sabotage operation targeting not just the Artemis 7 mission, but potentially multiple NASA programs over the past several years. He activated a large display screen that showed a timeline of suspicious incidents dating back 5 years. Equipment failures, communication breakdowns, budget overruns caused by mysterious technical problems, and 3 separate mission failures that had been attributed to human error or equipment malfunction. Seeing them laid out chronologically, the pattern was unmistakable. Each of these incidents involved technical failures that were later traced to design flaws or operator error, Agent Parker continued. But Dr. Rodriguez's analysis suggests that many of these failures may have been the result of deliberate sabotage using methods similar to what we've discovered in the Artemis 7 systems. Dr. Martinez gestured for me to take the floor. Jasmine, would you walk us through your analysis of the sabotage patterns? I stood up, feeling the weight of 24 pairs of eyes focused on me. 3 years ago, standing in front of a group like this would have been routine, just another technical briefing for another mission. Now it felt like stepping onto a stage where my credibility and competence would be judged by people who remembered my spectacular failure. The sabotage of the Artemis 7 mission follows a sophisticated pattern that suggests the work of someone with intimate knowledge of NASA protocols and aerospace engineering principles, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. The modifications were not random acts of vandalism. They were precisely targeted interventions designed to cause specific types of failure at predetermined moments in the mission timeline. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed breakdown of the sabotaged systems. The atmospheric entry calculations were altered to ensure that the spacecraft would encounter unexpected thermal stress during Mars' atmospheric insertion. The orbital mechanics were modified to gradually decay the spacecraft's orbit, making it impossible to maintain stable position for the planned surface operations. And most critically, the emergency backup protocols were reprogrammed to shut down life support systems instead of activating emergency procedures. A murmur of concern rippled through the room. These weren't just technical failures that would result in mission loss. These were deliberate attempts to ensure that the astronauts would die in space, far from any possibility of rescue. The sophistication of these modifications suggests that whoever is responsible has access to classified technical specifications and detailed knowledge of NASA operational procedures. This isn't the work of an external hacker or a disgruntled contractor employee. This is someone with legitimate credentials and high-level security clearance. Agent Parker nodded grimly. Our investigation has identified at least 7 individuals with the necessary access and expertise to carry out this type of sabotage. All of them have been placed under surveillance, and we're conducting detailed background investigations to identify any suspicious activity or foreign connections. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, NASA's Director of Mission Safety, raised her hand. Dr. Rodriguez, you mentioned that you believe similar sabotage was responsible for the classified mission failure 3 years ago. Can you provide more details about that incident? The question I had been dreading finally came. For 3 years, I had avoided discussing the details of my last classified assignment, partly because of security restrictions, and partly because the memories were still too painful. But now, with clear evidence that the same saboteur was still active, I knew I had to reveal everything I knew. 3 years ago, I was the lead engineer for a classified satellite deployment mission designated Operation Starwatch. The mission involved placing an advanced surveillance satellite in a highly elliptical orbit that would allow it to monitor specific regions of interest for national security purposes. The satellite was worth approximately $1.2 billion and represented 5 years of development work by teams across multiple agencies. I paused, remembering the excitement I had felt during the early phases of that project. It had been the most challenging and important assignment of my career, the kind of mission that could establish me as one of the premier aerospace engineers of my generation. The mission failed catastrophically during orbital insertion. The satellite's guidance system malfunctioned, sending it into an uncontrolled tumble that eventually resulted in its destruction during atmospheric re-entry. The failure was traced back to errors in the guidance algorithms that I had designed, and I was held responsible for the loss. Dr. Walsh leaned forward, her expression skeptical. But you're now claiming that those errors were not actually your fault? I'm claiming that the errors were not in the original algorithms that I designed. Someone modified my work after I submitted it for final review, introducing subtle changes that would cause catastrophic failure during the most critical phase of the mission. The modifications were sophisticated enough that they appeared to be legitimate design choices, unless you understood the specific mathematical relationships involved. Agent Parker activated another display, showing side-by-side comparisons of code fragments. Dr. Rodriguez provided us with copies of her original work from 3 years ago, which she had preserved on personal storage devices. We've compared her original algorithms with the code that was actually used in the failed mission, and there are indeed significant differences. The room erupted in surprised murmurs as people realized the implications of what they were seeing. If my original work had been sabotaged, then not only was I innocent of the charges that had destroyed my career, but the same saboteur who had framed me was now threatening the lives of 6 astronauts. Dr. Martinez spoke into the commotion. Jasmine, why didn't you reveal this evidence 3 years ago? Why did you accept responsibility for a failure that wasn't your fault? The answer to that question involved classified information that I still wasn't sure I was authorized to reveal, even in this secure setting. The investigation 3 years ago concluded that revealing the specific details of the sabotage would compromise ongoing national security operations. I was given a choice: accept responsibility for the failure and resign quietly, or face a court-martial that would require the disclosure of information that could endanger other missions and personnel. So you chose to sacrifice your career to protect classified operations? I chose to do what I was told was best for national security. I was young, I was scared, and I trusted that the people making those decisions knew better than I did. It was only later that I began to suspect that someone had manipulated the investigation to ensure that I would be blamed for the sabotage. Agent Parker nodded. Our review of the classified files from that investigation has revealed several irregularities that support Dr. Rodriguez's account. The investigating team was pressured to reach a quick conclusion. Key evidence was classified at unusually high levels to prevent review, and several potential leads were never pursued. Commander Lisa Chen's voice crackled through the communication system from the Artemis 7 spacecraft currently in final preparations for launch. Ground Control, this is Artemis 7. We're monitoring your discussion about potential sabotage of our mission systems. Request immediate clarification on the scope of the problem and timeline for resolution. Dr. Martinez activated the communication link. Commander Chen, this is Dr. Martinez. We have identified serious technical issues with several mission-critical systems. We're working to resolve these problems, but we may need to delay your launch while we complete additional safety checks. Negative Ground Control. We've been preparing for this mission for 2 years, and our launch window is extremely narrow. Unless you can provide definitive proof that our systems are compromised, we're proceeding with the scheduled launch in 18 hours. The determination in Commander Chen's voice was both inspiring and terrifying. She and her crew were committed to their mission, willing to risk everything to advance human exploration of Mars. But their courage meant nothing if the technology they were depending on had been deliberately sabotaged to ensure their deaths. Agent Parker muted the communication link and turned to me. Dr. Rodriguez, how long do you need to verify that all sabotage systems have been identified and corrected? I looked at the massive display, showing the thousands of interconnected systems that would keep the astronauts alive during their journey to Mars. Each system had been designed and built by different contractors, integrated by different teams, and tested by different organizations. The saboteur could have introduced problems anywhere in that complex web of technology. With unlimited resources and access to all contractor facilities, I estimate we would need at least 48 hours to completely audit every system and verify that no sabotage remains. But we only have 18 hours until the launch window closes. Dr. Walsh shook her head. Delaying the launch would cost hundreds of millions of dollars and set back the Mars exploration program by at least 2 years. The political and financial consequences would be enormous. The consequences of launching with sabotage systems would be far worse, I replied. 6 people would die, and the resulting investigation would likely uncover the sabotage anyway. The difference is that we'd be investigating a tragedy instead of preventing one. Agent Parker stood up and began pacing the room, clearly weighing the impossible decision before him. Is there any way to mitigate the risks without delaying the launch? Can we implement workarounds or backup procedures that would protect the crew, even if some sabotaged systems fail? I had been thinking about that exact question since discovering the extent of the sabotage. There might be a way, but it would require making real-time modifications to the mission profile and accepting significantly higher risks than originally planned. We could reprogram the guidance systems to use alternative algorithms that bypass the sabotaged code, implement manual overrides for critical systems, and pre-position emergency supplies at backup landing sites. How much additional risk are we talking about? Instead of a 97% probability of mission success, we'd be looking at maybe 70%. And instead of a 99.8% probability of crew survival, we'd be down to about 85%. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed those numbers. In the world of human spaceflight, those were enormous increases in risk. NASA typically wouldn't accept anything less than a 99% probability of crew survival for any mission. Dr. Martinez broke the silence. Jasmine, you know these systems better than anyone else in this room. If you were the mission commander, would you be willing to accept those risks to proceed with the launch? I thought about Commander Chen and her crew, about their years of preparation and their commitment to advancing human knowledge. I thought about the saboteur, who was probably watching our deliberations, hoping that fear would force us to delay the mission and give them another opportunity to cause even more damage. And I thought about my own 3 years of exile, the price I had paid for someone else's crimes. Dr. Martinez, if I were the mission commander, I would want to know that every possible precaution had been taken to ensure my crew's safety. But I would also want to know that we weren't letting terrorists or foreign agents dictate American space policy through fear and sabotage. Agent Parker stopped pacing and looked directly at me. Dr. Rodriguez, are you willing to take personal responsibility for implementing the safety modifications you've described? Are you willing to stake your reputation and your career on your ability to protect those astronauts? The irony of the question wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, my reputation and career had been destroyed when I was blamed for a sabotage that I hadn't committed. Now I was being asked to risk everything again to prevent a sabotage that I had discovered. The difference was that this time, I would be making the choice voluntarily, with full knowledge of the risks involved. Agent Parker, my reputation was destroyed 3 years ago, and my career ended when I was framed for crimes I didn't commit. I have nothing left to lose and everything to gain by helping to stop the people who destroyed my life and are now threatening the lives of 6 astronauts. Dr. Martinez smiled, and for a moment I saw the mentor who had believed in me when I was just a graduate student with big dreams and bigger ambitions. That settles it then. Jasmine, you're hereby appointed as lead systems engineer for the Artemis 7 emergency response team. You'll have unlimited access to all mission systems and the authority to make whatever modifications you deem necessary to ensure crew safety. As the meeting broke up and teams of engineers began implementing the emergency modifications I had outlined, I felt a strange sense of completion. For 3 years, I had been running from my past, hiding from the consequences of someone else's actions. But standing in that NASA command center, surrounded by people who were trusting me with the most important mission of their careers, I realized that some battles couldn't be won by hiding. The saboteur who had framed me 3 years ago was still out there, still working to destroy American space capabilities. But now they were facing Dr. Jasmine Rodriguez at full strength, with the resources of NASA and the FBI behind me, and with the motivation that came from knowing that 6 lives depended on my ability to outthink and outmaneuver someone who had already proven they were willing to kill to achieve their goals. Agent Parker approached me as I was reviewing the emergency system modifications. Dr. Rodriguez, there's something else you need to know. Our investigation has identified the person we believe is responsible for both the original sabotage 3 years ago and the current threat to Artemis 7. I looked up from the technical specifications, my heart racing. Who is it? Dr. Marcus Webb, the lead engineer at Henderson Tech Solutions. The same person whose workstation was used to implement the sabotage you discovered. But here's the interesting part. Dr. Webb has been dead for 6 months. He died in a car accident that we now believe was staged to cover up his murder. The revelation sent a chill down my spine. So someone killed Dr. Webb and has been using his identity to continue the sabotage? That's our working theory. Someone with access to Dr. Webb's credentials, his knowledge of the systems, and detailed information about his work habits and schedule. Someone who could impersonate him well enough to fool security systems and casual observation. I thought about the man I had occasionally seen in the Henderson Tech building over the past 3 years, the person I had assumed was Dr. Webb. If Agent Parker was right, then I had been working in the same building as a murderer and saboteur for months without realizing it. Do you have any idea who might be impersonating Dr. Webb? Agent Parker handed me a classified file. We have several theories, but the most disturbing possibility is that we're dealing with a deep-cover foreign agent who has been embedded in the American aerospace industry for years. Someone with the training and resources to eliminate Dr. Webb, assume his identity, and carry out a long-term sabotage campaign against NASA. As I opened the file and began reading about the suspected foreign agents who might be responsible for the sabotage, I realized that the stakes of this mission went far beyond the lives of 6 astronauts. We were potentially dealing with an act of war, a deliberate attack on American space capabilities by a hostile foreign power, and somehow, I had become a key figure in the effort to stop them. The next 18 hours would determine not just the fate of the Artemis 7 mission, but possibly the future of American leadership in space exploration. And standing between success and catastrophic failure was a woman who had spent 3 years hiding behind a janitor's uniform, finally ready to step back into the light and prove that some truths were worth fighting for, no matter what the cost. The clock on the mission control wall showed 14 hours until launch when the first alarm sounded. Red lights flashed across multiple workstations as engineers scrambled to identify the source of what appeared to be a catastrophic system failure in the Artemis 7 communications array. I was deep in the navigation code, implementing the final safety modifications, when Dr. Martinez's voice cut through the controlled chaos. All stations, we have a Priority 1 alert. Communications with Artemis 7 have been severed. We're showing complete blackout on all primary and backup channels. My blood turned to ice. The communications array was one of the systems I hadn't yet finished auditing for sabotage. If the saboteur had triggered a remote shutdown of the communication systems, the astronauts were now completely isolated, unable to receive warnings about the other compromised systems or instructions for the emergency procedures we had been developing. Agent Parker appeared at my workstation, his face grim. "Dr. Rodriguez, how quickly can you restore communications?" I was already pulling up the communications system diagnostics, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I traced the source of the failure. The shutdown appears to be coming from within the spacecraft's own systems, not from external interference. Someone has triggered an emergency communication lockdown protocol that's designed to prevent outside interference during critical mission phases. Can you override it? Not remotely. The lockdown can only be disabled from inside the spacecraft, and only by someone with command-level access codes. I looked up at Agent Parker, the implications clear. The astronauts don't know their communication system has been compromised, and we have no way to warn them. Dr. Martinez joined our urgent discussion. How long until they realize they've lost contact with ground control? They're in final pre-launch preparations, running through automated checklists. They might not notice the communication loss for several hours, and by then, I didn't need to finish the sentence. By then, it would be too late to abort the launch or implement the safety modifications we had been preparing. Agent Parker's phone rang, and he stepped away to take the call. When he returned, his expression was even more serious than before. That was our surveillance team at Henderson Tech Solutions. They've lost visual contact with the suspect we've been monitoring. Security footage shows someone matching the fake Dr. Webb's description leaving the building 20 minutes ago, just before the communication blackout began. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The saboteur hadn't just been planning to let the mission fail through the passive effects of corrupted code. They were actively triggering additional failures to ensure that we couldn't implement countermeasures or abort the launch. This wasn't just sabotage anymore. It was a real-time attack designed to guarantee that 6 astronauts would die. Dr. Martinez, I said, my voice urgent, we need to consider the possibility that the saboteur has access to real-time mission control systems. If they can trigger communication blackouts, they might be able to cause other critical failures during launch or flight. She nodded grimly. I'm ordering a complete security lockdown of all mission control facilities. No one enters or leaves without authorization, and all network access is being restricted to essential personnel only. But even as security teams scrambled to implement additional protections, I knew we were fighting a battle that we might already have lost. The saboteur had been planning this operation for years, had killed Dr. Webb to assume his identity, and had demonstrated the ability to penetrate NASA's most secure systems. They weren't going to be stopped by conventional security measures. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message contained only an address in downtown Houston and the words, "Come alone if you want to save them." I stared at the message, my hands trembling. The saboteur was making direct contact, offering some kind of exchange or negotiation. But why would they risk exposure by revealing their location? And what could they possibly want that would be worth sparing the lives of 6 astronauts? Agent Parker noticed my distraction. Dr. Rodriguez, what is it? I showed him the message, watching his expression shift from concern to alarm. It's obviously a trap, he said immediately. They want to eliminate you before you can complete the safety modifications. Maybe, but what if they're serious about making some kind of deal? What if there's a way to save the mission without risking the astronauts' lives? Jasmine, you can't seriously be considering meeting with a foreign agent who has already committed murder and sabotage. The risk is too great. I looked around the Mission Control Center, watching dozens of brilliant engineers working frantically to solve problems that might not have solutions. We were running out of time, running out of options, and running out of hope that we could protect the Artemis 7 crew from the elaborate trap that had been set for them. Agent Parker, what if I'm the key to stopping this? What if the saboteur needs me alive for some reason, and that gives us leverage we don't have otherwise? Before he could respond, another alarm sounded. This time, the alert was even more serious. The Artemis 7 life support systems were showing anomalous readings. According to the telemetry we were receiving, the spacecraft's atmospheric recycling systems had begun operating outside normal parameters, slowly building up carbon dioxide levels that would become dangerous within hours of launch. Dr. Martinez's voice was tight with controlled panic. Engineering teams, we need immediate analysis of the life support anomalies. If those systems fail during flight, the crew will have no backup options. I dove into the life support diagnostics, tracing the source of the malfunction through layers of interconnected systems. What I found confirmed my worst fears. The life support problems weren't random equipment failures. They were the result of carefully orchestrated sabotage that would cause the systems to degrade gradually, ensuring that the astronauts would die slowly and painfully from carbon dioxide poisoning. This is it, I announced to the room. This is how they plan to kill the crew. Not through dramatic explosions or catastrophic failures, but through slow, invisible system degradation that will be virtually impossible to detect from the ground once the mission is underway. Agent Parker looked over my shoulder at the diagnostic data. Can you fix it? Not from here. The sabotage is embedded in the spacecraft's onboard computer systems. Someone would have to be physically present inside the spacecraft to implement the necessary corrections, and that's impossible with the crew sealed inside for pre-launch procedures. I made a decision that surprised everyone in the room, including myself. I'm going to meet with whoever sent me that message. If there's even a small chance that they're willing to negotiate, we have to take it. Dr. Martinez shook her head vigorously. Absolutely not. I won't authorize you to walk into what's obviously a trap. Dr. Martinez, with all due respect, I'm not asking for authorization. I'm informing you of my decision. 6 people are going to die, unless we find a way to fix systems that can't be repaired remotely. If the saboteur wants to meet with me, that suggests they need something from me, which means we have leverage. Agent Parker stepped between me and the door. Dr. Rodriguez, I can't allow you to leave this facility. You're too valuable to the mission, and the risk is too great. I looked around the room at the dozens of people working desperately to save a mission that might already be doomed. These were some of the brightest minds in the aerospace industry, but they were fighting an enemy who had spent years planning every detail of this attack. Conventional approaches weren't going to work. Agent Parker, what if I wear a wire? What if you have surveillance teams in position around the meeting location? We could use this as an opportunity to identify and capture the saboteur while gathering intelligence about their larger operation. He considered this for a moment, clearly weighing the risks against the potential benefits. It would be extremely dangerous. If they detect the surveillance or the recording equipment, they could kill you immediately. And if we don't take this chance, 6 astronauts are going to die in 12 hours, and we'll never know who was responsible or whether they're planning additional attacks against future missions. Dr. Martinez joined the conversation, her voice filled with concern. Jasmine, I've already lost you once, when you were blamed for sabotage you didn't commit. I can't bear the thought of losing you again, especially when you're finally back where you belong. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For 3 years, I had convinced myself that nobody at NASA had ever really believed in me, that my exile had been accepted by everyone who had once been my colleagues and mentors. Hearing Dr. Martinez express genuine care for my safety reminded me of why I had originally chosen a career in aerospace engineering. To be part of something larger than myself, to work with people who shared my passion for exploration and discovery. Dr. Martinez, I appreciate your concern, but this isn't about me anymore. This is about proving that American space exploration can't be stopped by terrorists or foreign agents. This is about showing that we don't abandon our astronauts when they're in danger. I turned to Agent Parker. Give me 30 minutes to brief the engineering teams on the work I've completed so far. If something happens to me, they'll need to know everything I've discovered about the sabotage patterns and the modifications that still need to be implemented. He nodded reluctantly. 30 minutes. But you don't go anywhere without full FBI protection, and you wear multiple tracking devices in case something goes wrong. As I began transferring my technical knowledge to the other engineers, I couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. 3 years ago, I had been a respected Air Force colonel and NASA engineer, whose technical expertise was valued by the highest levels of government. Then, in a single day, I had become a disgraced failure, whose career was destroyed by accusations of incompetence. Now, I was once again being asked to risk everything to protect national security and save lives, but this time the stakes were even higher, and the dangers more immediate. The engineering teams absorbed my briefings with the focused intensity of people who understood that lives depended on their ability to implement complex technical solutions under extreme time pressure. As I explained the sabotage patterns and the corrective modifications, I could see them already beginning to work through the challenges that would face them if I didn't return from my meeting with the saboteur. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had initially been skeptical of my claims about the sabotage, approached me as I finished the technical briefings. Dr. Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. When you first presented your evidence about the sabotage systems, I thought you might be seeing conspiracies where none existed. I was wrong, and I'm sorry for doubting your analysis. Dr. Walsh, you were being appropriately cautious. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and I understand why my accusations seemed far-fetched at first. Still, I should have trusted your technical judgment. You've proven that your expertise and integrity are beyond question. She paused, looking uncomfortable. I also want you to know that many of us never believed the official story about what happened 3 years ago. Your work was always too precise, too careful for the kind of errors that supposedly caused that mission failure. Her words provided a small measure of comfort, but they also highlighted how much damage the false accusations had done to my life and career. 3 years of exile, 3 years of being treated like a failure by my own family, 3 years of hiding my true capabilities and passion behind a janitor's uniform. The saboteur who had framed me hadn't just destroyed a mission, they had stolen 3 years of my life and nearly broken my spirit in the process. Agent Parker returned with a team of FBI technicians who began outfitting me with surveillance equipment. Tiny cameras were sewn into my clothing, audio recording devices were concealed in my jewelry, and GPS tracking chips were embedded in my shoes and belt. If something went wrong during the meeting, law enforcement would have multiple ways to track my location and gather evidence about whoever was responsible for the sabotage. Dr. Rodriguez, Agent Parker said as the technicians completed their work, I want you to understand that we'll have teams positioned around the meeting location, but they won't be able to intervene immediately if you're threatened. You'll be on your own for at least the first few minutes of any confrontation. I nodded, understanding the limitations of the protection they could provide. Agent Parker, I've been on my own for 3 years. I think I can handle a few more minutes. As I prepared to leave NASA Johnson Space Center for what might be the last time, Dr. Martinez pulled me aside for a private conversation. Jasmine, I need you to know something before you go. The classified investigation you mentioned from 3 years ago, the one that supposedly proved you were responsible for the mission failure, I've reviewed those files, and there are inconsistencies that suggest the investigation was deliberately manipulated. I looked at her in surprise. What kind of inconsistencies? Key pieces of evidence were classified at levels that prevented independent review. Witnesses who could have supported your version of events were transferred to other assignments before they could be interviewed. And the investigating officer who reached the final conclusions about your guilt was later promoted to a position that gave him oversight of multiple NASA contractor relationships. The implications of what she was saying slowly sank in. Dr. Martinez, are you suggesting that the investigation itself was part of the sabotage? That someone within the government was working to ensure that I would be blamed for the mission failure? I'm suggesting that the conspiracy you've uncovered may be much larger and more sophisticated than we initially realized, and I'm worried that sending you to meet with these people might be exactly what they want us to do. Her warning sent a chill down my spine, but it also reinforced my determination to see this through to the end. If the sabotage really did involve corruption within the government agencies responsible for protecting national security, then the threat to future space missions was even greater than we had feared. And if high-level officials had been involved in framing me 3 years ago, then my personal vindication was connected to much larger questions about the integrity of American space exploration. Dr. Martinez, that's all the more reason why I need to take this risk. If we don't expose the full scope of this conspiracy, it will continue to threaten every future mission, every astronaut, and every achievement of the American space program. As I walked out of the NASA facility and toward the meeting location, I couldn't help but think about my family's reaction when they learned what had really happened. For 3 years, they had been ashamed of me, disappointed in my failure to live up to the expectations they had once held. They had no idea that their quiet janitor sister was about to risk her life to save 6 astronauts and expose a conspiracy that threatened national security. In a few hours, assuming I survived the confrontation that awaited me, they would finally understand who I really was and what I had been fighting for during my years of exile. But first, I had to face the person who had destroyed my life and was now threatening to kill 6 innocent people for reasons I didn't yet understand. The address led me to an abandoned warehouse in an industrial district of Houston. As I approached the building, I could see surveillance teams positioning themselves in nearby locations, though they were careful to remain hidden from anyone who might be watching from inside the warehouse. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty parking lot, creating an atmosphere of menace that matched the danger of the situation. I pushed open the door to the warehouse and stepped inside, my heart pounding as I entered what might be the final confrontation of a battle that had been raging secretly for 3 years. Somewhere in the darkness ahead was the person who had framed me, who had killed Dr. Webb, and who was now planning to murder 6 astronauts in front of the entire world. But I was no longer the frightened young engineer who had accepted blame for crimes she didn't commit. I was Dr. Jasmine Rodriguez, and I was ready to fight for the truth, no matter what the cost. The figure that emerged from the shadows of the warehouse was not what I expected. Instead of the imposing foreign agent I had imagined, I found myself facing a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and tired eyes. She wore a simple business suit and carried herself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. What shocked me most was the NASA identification badge clipped to her jacket. "Dr. Rodriguez," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that I couldn't immediately place. "Thank you for coming. My name is Dr. Elena Kozlov, and I've been waiting 3 years to meet you face to face." I kept my distance, remembering Agent Parker's warnings about the dangers of this encounter. "Dr. Kozlov, I've never heard of you. How do you know who I am?" She smiled sadly. "I know everything about you, Jasmine. I know about your brilliant work on the Europa mission guidance systems. I know about your military service and your classified assignments. And I know about the terrible injustice that was done to you 3 years ago, when you were blamed for sabotage that you didn't commit." Her words sent a chill through me. If you know I was innocent, then you must also know who was really responsible for that mission failure. I know because I was responsible for it. I sabotaged the Starwatch mission, just as I've sabotaged the Artemis 7 systems. But not for the reasons you think, and not with the outcomes you fear. I stared at her in disbelief. "You're telling me that you've been planning to kill 6 astronauts, and you expect me to believe you have noble motivations?" Dr. Kozlov gestured to a pair of chairs that had been set up in the center of the empty warehouse. "Please, sit down. Let me explain what's really happening here, because the lives of those astronauts depend on your understanding the truth." Against my better judgment, I moved closer, but remained standing. "Start talking. And remember that everything you say is being recorded by the FBI. I'm counting on it. The story I'm about to tell you needs to be heard by people in positions of authority." She sat down and folded her hands in her lap. 3 years ago, I was a deep-cover intelligence operative working for the Russian Space Agency. My mission was to infiltrate NASA and gather intelligence about advanced American space technologies. My hand moved instinctively toward the panic button that Agent Parker had given me. But Dr. Kozlov held up a hand to stop me. "Please, let me finish. Yes, I was a spy. But during my years working alongside American engineers and scientists, I discovered something that changed everything I believed about my mission. I learned that there were people within both the Russian and American space programs who were planning to use our competition as cover for something far more sinister." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a tablet computer, which she activated and handed to me. "What you're looking at are communications between corrupt officials in both countries who have been working together to sabotage space missions in order to justify massive increases in military space budgets." I looked at the screen, seeing encrypted messages that detailed a conspiracy involving defense contractors, military officials, and space agency administrators from both nations. The messages discussed specific missions that would be allowed to fail in order to create public demand for more aggressive space militarization. "According to this plan," Dr. Kozlov continued, "the Artemis 7 mission was supposed to fail catastrophically, killing all 6 crew members and creating public outrage that would justify the development of military space weapons systems worth hundreds of billions of dollars." I looked up from the tablet, my mind struggling to process the implications of what she was telling me. "You're saying that people within NASA and the Russian Space Agency have been working together to kill astronauts for profit?" "Not just NASA and the Russian agency. Defense contractors, military officials, and politicians from multiple countries. The space race has become a cover for one of the largest corruption schemes in history." She paused, her expression filled with regret. 3 years ago, I sabotaged the Starwatch mission because I was following orders from my handlers. But when I learned that you were being blamed for my actions, I began to question everything I had been told about my mission." "So you decided to continue sabotaging missions?" "No. I decided to expose the conspiracy. But the only way to do that was to make it appear that I was still following orders, while actually working to prevent the catastrophic failures that were being planned." She gestured toward the tablet. "Every piece of sabotage I've implemented in the Artemis 7 systems can be reversed with a simple software update that I've already prepared. The crew will be completely safe if the correct protocols are followed." I stared at her, trying to determine whether she was telling the truth or spinning an elaborate lie to cover her real intentions. "If you really wanted to protect the astronauts, why didn't you just come forward with this information instead of creating a crisis that could kill them?" "Because the conspiracy involves people at the highest levels of government and industry. Simply revealing the evidence wouldn't have been enough to stop them. They would have discredited me as a rogue agent and continued with their plans. The only way to expose them was to force them to reveal themselves by creating a situation where they would have to choose between protecting the conspiracy and protecting human lives. My phone buzzed with an urgent message from Agent Parker. "Dr. Rodriguez, we're detecting multiple vehicles approaching your location. You need to get out of there immediately." Dr. Kozlov heard the message and nodded grimly. "They've found us. The corrupt officials I've been working to expose have realized that I've been double-crossing them, and they're coming to eliminate both of us before we can reveal the truth. Then give me the software update that will fix the Artemis 7 systems. If you're really trying to protect those astronauts, prove it." She handed me a small data drive. This contains the corrective algorithms for all the sabotaged systems, plus the evidence about the conspiracy that you'll need to expose the people responsible. But Jasmine, you need to understand that using this information will put your life in danger. There are people who will kill to keep this conspiracy secret. The sound of vehicles pulling up outside the warehouse confirmed her warning. Through the windows, I could see armed figures in tactical gear surrounding the building. These weren't FBI agents coming to rescue me. They were the corrupt officials that Dr. Kozlov had been warning me about. "There's a back exit through the loading dock," she said, standing up and moving toward the rear of the building. "We can reach your FBI backup teams if we move quickly." As we ran through the warehouse, I couldn't help but think about the surreal nature of the situation. I was fleeing from corrupt government officials alongside a former Russian spy who claimed to be protecting American astronauts from a conspiracy that involved people from both countries. 3 years ago, if someone had told me this would be my life, I would have recommended they seek psychiatric help. We reached the loading dock just as the front doors of the warehouse exploded inward. Armed figures in black tactical gear poured into the building, their weapons raised and their faces hidden behind masks. These weren't law enforcement officers conducting a legitimate operation. They were mercenaries or corrupt agents working to protect the conspiracy that Dr. Kozlov had described. Agent Parker's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Dr. Rodriguez, we have your location. Stay down and move toward the sound of our vehicles." The next few minutes passed in a blur of gunfire, shouting, and chaos as FBI agents engaged with the armed figures who had been sent to eliminate us. Dr. Kozlov and I crawled across the loading dock, staying low to avoid the bullets that were flying overhead. When we finally reached the FBI vehicles, Agent Parker pulled us both into an armored van and immediately began speeding toward NASA Johnson Space Center. "Dr. Rodriguez, are you injured?" he asked, checking me for wounds as we drove. "I'm fine, but we have bigger problems. Dr. Kozlov has information about a conspiracy involving people at the highest levels of government, and she has the software fixes needed to save the Artemis 7 mission." Agent Parker looked at Dr. Kozlov with obvious suspicion. "And we're supposed to trust a foreign spy who admits to sabotaging American space missions?" "You're supposed to trust the evidence," she replied, handing him a copy of the data drive. "And you're supposed to recognize that sometimes the people we think are our enemies are actually trying to save us from our real enemies." When we arrived at NASA, the Mission Control Center was in chaos. The countdown clock showed less than 2 hours until launch, and engineers were still struggling with the multiple system failures that were threatening the mission. Dr. Martinez rushed over to meet us as we entered the facility. "Jasmine, thank God you're safe. We've been trying to implement the modifications you outlined, but we're running out of time. The life support anomalies are getting worse, and we still haven't restored communications with the crew." I handed her the data drive that Dr. Kozlov had given me. "This contains the corrective algorithms for all the sabotage systems. But Dr. Martinez, there's something else you need to know. The conspiracy behind this sabotage involves people within NASA and the government. We can't trust everyone who has access to these systems." Her face went pale as she absorbed the implications. "Are you saying that we have traitors working inside NASA?" "I'm saying that we need to be very careful about who has access to these corrections. And we need to implement them using a secure protocol that can't be compromised by anyone with inside knowledge." Over the next hour, working with a small team of engineers that Dr. Martinez had personally vetted, we implemented Dr. Kozlov's corrective algorithms. One by one, the sabotage systems began returning to normal operation. Communications with the crew were restored, life support readings stabilized, and the guidance algorithms were corrected to ensure safe navigation to Mars. But even as we worked to save the mission, Agent Parker and his team were conducting arrests based on the evidence that Dr. Kozlov had provided. Corrupt officials within NASA, the Department of Defense, and several major aerospace contractors were taken into custody as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. With 30 minutes remaining until launch, Dr. Martinez made the final decision to proceed with the mission. All systems were showing green. The crew had been briefed on the emergency procedures we had developed, and the corrupt officials who had been planning to sabotage the mission were in FBI custody. As the countdown reached its final moments, I stood in mission control, watching the culmination of everything I had worked for over the past 3 years. The Artemis 7 spacecraft lifted off perfectly, its trajectory true, and its systems functioning exactly as designed. Commander Chen and her crew were safely on their way to Mars, protected by technology that had been saved from sabotage by the woman they thought was just a janitor. Dr. Martinez approached me as the spacecraft disappeared from view. "Jasmine, on behalf of NASA and the American Space Program, I want to offer you a formal apology for what happened 3 years ago. Your security clearance will be fully restored, and we'd like to offer you any position in the agency that interests you." I looked around the Mission Control Center, seeing it with new eyes. 3 years ago, I had been forced to leave this world in disgrace, blamed for crimes I didn't commit. Now I was being welcomed back as a hero, vindicated by evidence that had nearly cost me my life to obtain. "Dr. Martinez, I appreciate the offer, but I need some time to think about what I want to do next. 3 years of hiding taught me some important lessons about who I am and what really matters to me." As I left NASA that day, I thought about my family and the conversation I would have with them when I returned home. For 3 years, they had been ashamed of me, disappointed in what they saw as my failure to live up to my potential. Tonight, they would learn that their janitor sister had saved 6 astronauts and exposed a conspiracy that threatened national security. But more importantly, they would learn that sometimes the people who seem to have fallen the furthest are actually the ones who are fighting the hardest for what's right. And sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have when you're trying to change the world. The woman who had spent 3 years pushing a cleaning cart through the halls of Henderson Tech Solutions was gone forever. In her place stood Dr. Jasmine Rodriguez, aerospace engineer, former Air Force colonel, and the person who had proved that some truths are worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes or how much it costs to reveal them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.